I'm Chris Sanderson, and you're listening to Sweet Success.
You've just checked in to Sweet Success. Join me, Katie Cline, for exclusive conversations with hotel executives, hospitality leaders, and industry innovators. Together, we'll uncover the strategies and techniques these masters of hospitality relentlessly refine. Whether you're already in the industry or just starting out, tune in every week to unlock the secret to your sweet success. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sweet Success. I'm your host, Katie Cline, and first of all, I want to say a very happy new year to you all. 2025 is here, and we are kicking things off with a super special episode today. Here with me is the incredible Chris Sanderson, co-founder of the Future Laboratory, a global leader in trend forecasting, consumer insights, and brand strategy. Today, he's here to give us all the very first look at their newest report, FutureFive 2025, a trend briefing designed to help us navigate key insights, opinions, and future opportunities that will be crucial to our strategic planning in the year ahead and beyond. Chris, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks, Katie. It's good to be spending time with you.
I have to say, it is so lovely to see you again. I first saw you present what feels like a lifetime ago at a conference we hosted back when I was working for W Hotels. And I just remember being blown away by the insights that you shared and how you were able to synthesize the information so eloquently. So before we dive into your latest trends report, I was hoping you can give us a bit of background on the company.
Yeah, I suppose it's, when I set the business up with my partner, it was very much that trend forecasting was something that people in fashion did.
Mhm.
And it had that background and that pedigree, mainly because if you think of fashion as an industry, it's reinventing itself on such these fast cycles. Every 6 months it's new. Except now, of course, it's every day there's a new drop. But back in the day, back in the 90s, you had this very clear idea of seasons and seasonality and this desire to create this new collection. And most businesses just didn't operate at that speed. So from the 80s onwards, the fashion industry had already started to create support industries that were there to help them, that would give them predictions in color, predictions in textile, predictions in how the consumer was changing in their tastes of what they wanted to wear and what they were going to want. Because as much as we think that fashion is a vision-driven business, it is as much a numbers game as it is a creative and vision game, because you're always going to have somebody kind of looking at you when you're standing in front of that lovely vision board going, I see blue, who's kind of got their eye on the figures from last season going, yeah, but pink sold really well last season. Shouldn't we just do pink all over again? The voice of the brand manager or the CFO. And of course, the creative, the designer, the person with a vision is going, yeah, but that was last season. And this season, I'm seeing something different. And that comes from that intuitive sense of being able to, what Faith Popcorn called from Brain Reserve, called brailing culture. This idea that you're using all your tactile skills, all of your senses to really have a sense of what's going on around you and intuitively how that continues to change. And so we saw back in the 90s that you had this whole set of what I call those creative, intuitive type prediction businesses that were feeling change in culture. They were seeing it on the street. And then you had this whole second set of very kind of organized, empirical, data-driven businesses that were giving you the numbers about how things were changing. But the two weren't going together. And so the Future Laboratory really came out of this desire to put the left and the right brain together, to put the quant and the qual together, and to really put that idea of a much more holistic approach to understanding how you could see change. In the words of the American writer and thinker, the future, Douglas Gibson, the future has already happened. It just isn't very well distributed. And that's really what our job has been. I mean, as you know, very early on, we looked at this tiny little business that we heard of called Airbnb coming up of San Francisco that was doing this really strange thing, which was offering you the opportunity to bed down in their room for a night. And I remember so clearly going to a conference for leading hotels of the world, which is one of these really old-fashioned, established hospitality, kind of businesses, and talking about this exciting little business that we had come across that we thought was genuinely going to change the world of hospitality. And we got laughed off the stage because the room was full of hoteliers for whom it was in their interest to not to think beyond their standard models of RevPAR and organizational success that they'd seen with the internet and platforms like leading hotels. So the notion that suddenly that whole model could be disrupted by an innovative process that had nothing to do with hotel rooms was, of course, out of their thinking. And of course, that's what newness is all about. It's disruption through deviancy, which is actually a mathematical word, not a sort of sociological one.
Hmm. Well, I find it fascinating that you touched on trend forecasting and fashion because I was actually a fashion merchandising major at university. And I thought I wanted to be a trend forecaster as my career after uni. And so it's making a lot of sense to me while I've always been really attracted to the work that you guys do. And I love that story that you share about Airbnb, especially because if we think about how Airbnb started in terms of actual blow up beds in someone's space, of course the hotel industry would be like, that's never going to compete with us. That's what I
Yeah.
love what you guys do. You're able to really zoom out and say, but see the bigger picture of what they are offering to customers, offering to the world. And today we're going to get to look at your newest trend briefing document, FutureFive 2025. I'm super excited to hear all about that. But before we do, let's just, I guess, zoom out a little bit further and tell us what exactly is a trend briefing document.
At the Future Laboratory, we have an online subscription platform called LSN Global, Lifestyle News. And this operates across 15 different consumer categories. So hospitality, travel, wellness, F&B, luxury, retail, automotive, fintech, beauty, you name it, we
Mm.
kind of cover it. And we're looking at what's new and what's next across those categories globally. So I have an editorial team that are just constantly an engine producing all this new intel. And so that's mainly sits within a paywall
Mhm.
for our members and our clients. And you can find out more about that at lsnglobal.com. But clearly we've got more material than we know what to do with. So we produce reports which are available on the Future Laboratory website. And we do those in different ways. Sometimes we do them in sectors. So we tend to every year do a retail report, we do a travel report, we do a beauty report. But with FutureFive, which we also designed specifically as a much lower price product, so its availability is much broader. Because as I'm sure you can recognize, some of these reports can be quite punchy
Mhm.
in their price. This one comes in less than $100,
Mm.
and it's designed for professionals who really want a sense of a broader understanding of what's going on across sectors. So instead of looking at things through verticals that I've described, we look at them through changes. So our latest FutureFive chooses the top 5 topics that we believe anyone in any business needs to know about. So in our newest report, we're looking at AI, obviously, couldn't not look at AI. We're looking at the notion of how space and our use of space, especially post-COVID, is changing. We're looking at the topic of gaming, because for us, this is an industry that is now worth more than the music and the entertainment, the movie industry combined.
Wow.
And yet I think most of us, because it's a generational issue, didn't really grow up playing games. Maybe there was the odd bit of Donkey Kong or whatever it was
I
called,
loved Donkey Kong.
Donkey Kong, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but and we're not quite, and yet we all know that our kids are absolutely involved in this, and also that a growing number of gamers, in fact, almost we're at a tipping point where the majority of gamers globally are female,
Mm.
and it's that kind of surprising information that we start to delve into, and of course. Anyone with a phone knows that we're now candy crushing our way through the day, or
Mhm.
we're wordling or quaddling our time. And so the notion of gaming has really broadened out. So its impact on brand is really, we think, very relevant. And then we also wanted to tackle a really interesting topic because it crosses so many different sectors again of longevity, another really hot topic that we're seeing in terms of this understanding of how we've really got this desire to live longer and to continue to think about how we live happier, healthier, wealthier lives as humans. So we talk a lot about the transformation economy, and I hope we'll chat about that in a minute. And then obviously, how could we not talk about the future without touching on sustainability? So again, we've looked at how brands are upping the ante in their response to climate activism, and also into thinking about tangible positive change within their organizational structures and their relationship with consumers.
And before we dive into each of those 5 trends specifically, which we will absolutely do, what would you say is the unifying theme or concept of this report?
Well, for us, we have been talking well, quite a lot about the pace of change, about the rate of change, the requirement for an engagement with change.
Mm,
And so, quite a few years ago, we started looking at how we felt that consumer society was moving through this notion of what's been called the experience economy,
mhm.
which a phrase in itself is now over 17 years old, since
Wow.
Joseph B. Pine, a writer, and his partner coined that term for a book, the experience economy. We've now had all the figures out from the consultants like Bain and Co, which demonstrate that globally consumers are investing and spending more on experiences than they are on traditional product.
Mhm,
So we're all on that train. We
mhm,
get that.
mhm,
The issue that we're finding is, well, how do we make money out of experience instead of traditional product? But for us, that we're already anticipating what we're calling the transformation economy, which, as I've kind of already described, is that what we see now as we move into the second half of the third decade of the 21st century is that consumers are increasingly proactively looking for the brands that they believe they can have a relationship with, that they can partner with, that are helping them on their own journey to self-actualize. And as part of that self-actualization, to become, as I've said, healthier, wealthier, and happier human beings.
mm,
And that's asking quite a lot out of a brand that previously just thought, well, you've just got to pay me some money and I'll just give you some product. And
mm.
what you do with it is up to you. Most of us don't want that kind of transactional relationship from a brand anymore. We're expecting so much more. And so, really, for brands to get to grips with this idea of what it means to have a meaningful relationship with a client is a consumer, a guest, however we frame them,
Yep,
a user, is really the critical thing that we've got to solve here at this as we move into 2025 and beyond.
right. And you said healthier, happier, and wealthier.
And wealthier, not just about money, but wealthier in terms of the quality of our
Sure.
experiences, the quality of our life, and so which all obviously will play in as we have this conversation into this notion of longevity, because so much of all of the debate around longevity spans or really is centralizes on this idea that there's no point living longer if the quality of your life actually doesn't meet expectation, doesn't actually give
Absolutely.
you a successful quality of life.
Yeah. Well, as we are in the peak of New Year's resolution season, healthier, wealthier, happier. I mean, I think there's no 3 better things to ask for. So let's dive into the trends. The first one that you
Mm.
talked about, artificial intelligence, a topic that I believe everyone is talking about, but few actually understand. So I'm really excited to hear more about this one from you.
Yeah, well, I think for all of us, the rise of ChatGPT over a very short period of time is something that has obviously garnered a lot of news coverage,
Hmm.
and for some of us, it's already become a really central tool. And in fact, at LSN Global, we're just launching our own generative AI tool
Hmm.
within our own framework of knowledge, where we instead of having something that just is um, trolling through a mass of data that you can find anywhere,
Hmm.
is just using our own archive of 20 years worth of hard kind of crafted quality material to help people to come to conclusions and answer questions. But in essence, I think AI takes so many different formats, but as I'm on that, let's just focus on generative AI
Hmm.
at the moment as we start to really think about this opportunity that technology offers to shorten the way in which we do onerous
Hmm.
tasks. And that, I think, sits at the heart of what AI can do, which is that it can summarize, it can contextualize, it can pull out 5 meaningful quotes for you from a wealth of material. It can provide insights. It's a way to help shortcut in a way that when maybe you and I were going to school or within our parents' generation, for sure, we suddenly had a calculator that sat in our hand, instead of this idea of a table of complicated calculus that we had to learn by heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I see it like a modern day calculator. It's a shortcut to providing a solution to a really simple equation, which is I need to understand more about, I need to know an answer to. And that for sure is changing the way many of us are already working, the way that we deliver our work and our opportunity to do things at speed. But it's begun to highlight already the requirement for a whole new set of skills that enable people to profile that information, to query that information, to contextualize that information, to ask the right questions. So as much as we talk now about AI, we're fascinated at the Future Laboratory about the importance of HI, human intelligence, and how the two will go hand in hand. So this is why we started to look at this idea of what we've called the synthesine era, which is this point at which we embrace synthetic intelligence and how increasingly we find ways to become supercharged rather than enslaved by AI. And so much of our thinking at the Future Laboratory is how we move away from those rather dystopian tropes that we see in science fiction, like Minority Report, and actually build for ourselves a very different future where we make a better future happen and understand that AI can play an important role in that. So I think at the moment we're still fascinated by often the kit. So think about Apple Pro and think about these massive glasses that suddenly we're going to wear and wander around and stumble around and stick our hands out doing funny things. And of course, that's going to feel as odd as if you remember the first time you saw somebody walking down the street using a phone that was handset free,
Right.
and they just had earpods or earphones in, and they seemed to just be talking to themselves like somebody that was kind of a bit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we kind of thought, oh my goodness, that person's lost it. And they're
Right.
just having this conversation to themselves. And of course, they weren't. They
Right.
were having a conversation with somebody else. We just couldn't see the other person. So I think, in the way that we'll see us adapt to that technology, which we've all obviously embraced super quick, I think we will see ways in which we begin to understand how we define this notion of intelligence. And how really we need to move beyond the idea that AI is somehow going to develop this sort of mental capacity that is in any way or innately human. For us, this is the big point, the big jumping off point where actually synthetic intelligence is synthetic and will continue to be synthetic. And the way that we use it as human beings is really what we need to be looking at now. So as we start to think about the idea of all sorts of levels of capability, from genetic engineering to biotech to quantum computing, we start to look at the opportunity that AI offers us for new powered solutions that start to change the way that we're able to do things. And this is where the use of that term generative becomes really important, because what AI can do is just process things at a rate that we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
It can run through the solutions, it can run through the challenges and the opportunities and just spit out in the same way that, that natural rate of processing capability development that we've seen over the last 30 years has changed the speed at which we can use a computer. And we're all aware of that. But it's the idea that suddenly you've got a food tech company in Chile that is going to be Chile's first unicorn company that's looking at how you use AI to find unexpected combinations of plant-based ingredients to create healthier and more sustainable alternatives to animal-based products. So it's a really simple tool. How do I help people with menu planning? L'Oreal working with the University of Oregon to capitalize on its latest technology, looking into skin grafts and the applications for those globally, currently being used to think of customizable skin grafts for burns patients with skin diseases. So already you've got organizations and institutions like Morgan Stanley that are predicting that the use of AI in early stage drug development is going to translate to an additional maybe 50 new therapies over the next 10 years. And that's got a value of over $50 billion. So that sense of how we just speed up processes, especially in areas that traditionally would take a long time,
Right.
such as drug development, I think is where we're going to see massive opportunity and development in a really short period of time. And so that notion of how it's going to enhance opportunity, I think, for humans is one of the first things that we need to actually embrace and be positive about.
Mhm.
Because as much as we might think it's going to be about taking away jobs,
Mm.
just look at what happened with the information communication technology revolution. The development of word processors removed the requirement for typing pools.
Mhm.
Remember those?
Mhm.
These cohorts of women who were all occupying entire floors of office buildings, typing out the words of men.
Mhm.
Where does that happen now? It doesn't. Has it put a whole generation of women out of work? No, it did the reverse. It actually enabled a whole generation of women to be liberated from simply typing out men's dictums to actually creating the beginnings of an equality. We're not there yet, we know that, but the beginnings of an equality within the workforce. It actually really freed this idea of the secretary from workforce, and it's had an enormous power. And similarly, we're going to lose work definitions, but we're building a whole new subset
Yeah.
that will free a whole new generation of people to think about new creative opportunities for work. So for us, it's a really exciting opportunity, whether it be in luxury, whether it be in quite traditional categories, the need for conveyancing within legal frameworks, that kind of process that we currently go through with insurance and buying a house. That's all going to change. But I think we're also going to see the whole development of whole new areas of opportunity, especially around learning, teaching, coaching, guidance, support. I mean, I think one of the most exciting areas that we're clearly seeing development in is empathic AI tools, which is where we also get robotics coming in, which is really interesting, such as tools that can actually guide and support our kids rather than actually them relying on social platforms, which, as we know, we're all now challenging for the
Mhm.
way in which they're encouraging our kids in often some really bad behaviors, towards the idea of a mindful robot that is there to prompt our child towards an educational learning direction, to engage in some empathic experience. Or again, equally, how this could be a coach that sits with somebody who suddenly finds himself on their own after the death of their partner, who may be suffering from a lack of mental capacity, reduced visual capacity, mobility, and need to be reminded to take their meds, to engage in some activity, to get up and stand around, to move around a bit, to do a bit of activity, to engage in a mental game that's actually, again, improving their mental acuity, to remind them to go and call a friend, to watch a challenging TV program rather than a boring one. All of these things. And so we're seeing the development of empathic AI tools that become guidance models, friendship robots, and all sorts of interesting areas. And of course, then that's where we move into gaming, which we'll talk about later. But I think the companionship opportunity for mentorship and loneliness support with empathic AI is really interesting.
Mm.
And then I suppose finally for me in this category, one just case study that we've looked at was with the electronics and digital company LG, that looked at how it could beta test a new menopause mode feature in its technology, which really helps women to have an empathic response module on some of their technology that helps them to better understand and monitor their body temperature, their heart rate, their blood oxygen level, to predict when they're going to have a hot flush.
Mm.
So, how do we actually use technology to really improve the quality of our life by giving us those predictive algorithms that help us to better manage and maintain a more productive day? And so, I think all of those kind of things become super valuable to us as individuals as we move through what is the next sort of revolution that we'll have with technology. And I think, just to finish, it's really important. Here at the Future Laboratory, we're really firm believers that technology does not transform society. Society transforms itself using technology. That's the power balance. And we have to remember that, is that we are in control. We can keep control. We can maintain control. AI is a force for good. It's not a force for evil.
It's so interesting how much fear is out there around
Yeah,
AI. Like you
absolutely.
referenced Minority Report, right? And I think a lot of, especially when we started to see it hitting mass appeal, mainstream, people like myself hearing about it, utilizing it, etc. And I think a lot of the narrative at first was like, it's going to take away jobs or it's going to take away all the creative pursuits that we all love to do. And something that you said earlier about how it's here to really help us with those onerous tasks, I think is such a fascinating reframe. A quick side story, my photographer from my wedding, who is also the photographer for the cover of this podcast, shout out to Jessica O, incredible photographer. She was telling me about an AI solution that she uses where she has, thousands upon thousands of edited photos that she has
Yeah,
done for couples and shoots throughout her, entire career. She uploaded all of those in and the raw photos of those as well. So that software could learn how she edits her photography. So she's
yeah,
still the one going out there, taking the photos, capturing it, doing the creative work. But now she's saving herself hours by saying, here's my new raw images. Tell me how you think I would edit those. And now it's tweaks as opposed to starting from the process in the beginning.
absolutely.
It's
Yeah,
fascinating. And I think
yeah.
in hospitality, we talk a lot about this convergence of high tech and high touch. And as you said, AI is now here to supercharge us humans, not to replace us humans. So if we look at the hospitality industry in general, I know you touched on a lot about AI right there. Do you see any predictions of the trend unfolding specifically within the hospitality or hotel space?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, we're already aware of how useful our mobiles are on holiday in terms of creating a platform for communication
Hmm.
and easing our journey through a hospitality experience. And I just see that continuing. So the idea that, you know, currently most of us, if we're at somewhere that's using technology, we're WhatsApping the concierge now.
Hmm.
We're WhatsApping the bar for the drink while we're lounging by the pool. The next step obviously is the app that enables a more seamless experience that starts to anticipate the fact that you're highly likely now to order a mojito.
Hmm.
So how do you actually make that whole process so much more streamlined? And I think that's the next stage, is how the intelligence starts to better understand you as a guest. So, to do what a really good hotelier does, which is anticipate a guest's need before they realize that they need it for themselves. And do you know what? Actually, that's the magic of a great hotel. But that magic is actually also contained within an algorithm.
Hmm.
And so, how we package that up and enable the hotel to just do that, because the guest services team get the prompt to remind them, now's the time to check in on Chris. Now's the time to maybe take him something. Now's the time, based on what we understand about his profile and what we've learned about him through his repeat stays or whatever. Now's the time to do this.
Hmm.
And that's the big change.
Ready to future proof your business? The Future Laboratories consumer foresight and trends intelligence platform, LSN Global, just got smarter. Introducing Ember, a new generative AI tool. Ember transforms LSN Global into your personal foresight research team. Faster, smarter, and more powerful than ever before. LSN Global connects you with the trends, data, and insights shaping tomorrow's business landscape. And now, with AI-enhanced research, it's your trusted intelligence partner. Head to lsnglobal.com/membership to book a demo or become a member today to try the beta version of Ember. Research has never been this seamless. Okay, moving on to the second trend you touched on, futures.
Okay, so in our next FutureFive trend, and I think this is a bit simpler, so we can probably kind of talk about this a little bit quicker, is this notion of future spaces.
Mm.
And just how I think, as we continue to see the impact of what we call our global drivers, those large universal forces that are changing the world around us.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking here obviously about climate change, resource scarcity,
Mhm.
evolving demographics, some of those things that are changing the nature of society. We think about the impact of our space and the crush that we have on space. We're now already, as a species, an urban species rather than a rural species.
Mhm.
That's only been the case for 10 years, but globally, more of us now live in towns and cities. And of course, the number of us that will live in towns and cities will actually increase to over 70% by 2050. So the way in which we view space and the way in which we're behaving as people is set to change because of those very simple trends, the numbers game
Mhm.
of how that's changing. So we've started to look maybe at the way in which we think about design for the public realm, how that fits in with other areas that we've been looking at. So again, this is where wellness starts to come into the fore, I think, and about how post-pandemic we've seen the requirement for an access to outdoor space and the positive impact that we all now recognize that that has. Increasingly, the talk within urban planning is around this idea of what's called the 15-minute city. So, how you can have access to everything you need within 15 minutes of travel. And often that's on foot, not even in a car. How do we build the carless city? All of these are concerns that we're seeing. And when we've spoken to experts like Professor Des Fitzgerald, who's the author of The Living City, Why Cities Don't Need to Be Green to Be Great, we start to see around how we really maybe recontextualize the idea of what it means to create a climate positive environment, of how we think about placemaking, how well-being becomes central to that as a major concern, and how we start to think about maintaining psychological well-being for our citizens within an area. Because, of course, increasingly, brands are playing a really critical role in this. Just think about some of those big office developments that we're seeing from US businesses like Google and Amazon, for example, where
Sure.
they're literally taking over whole city blocks, having metro stations built under them to create transport hubs,
Mhm.
and really rethinking about the revitalization of our whole neighborhood. And I think this is where we start to see it really take root, as well as the fact that on all sorts of different scales globally, we're seeing the development of new town concepts as well as new city concepts, whether it be in the UK, whether it be in the Middle East, whether it be in other European cities or across Asia as well, as we start to reevaluate exactly what we think our citizens need to prosper in the 21st century. So I think that sense of how spaces increasingly are going to be driven by this much more 360 well-being drive and need is a really important area to think about as we start to look about what placemaking and what space making is going to be all about
Mhm.
as we move forward. And at the same time, of course, that we bump into technology through amazing developments, of course, like the Sphere, which is now obviously launched in Las Vegas and is already being lined up in many cities around the world who are queuing up to have a sphere of their own.
Yeah.
So we start to see this re-evaluation of entertainment space, of socializing space, of play space and engagement space, and the use of technology within these to create new live entertainment formats, I think, is also a critical area of development. And I was really fascinated. We looked into what Crate and Barrel have been doing recently by embracing the need to help consumers retrofit and upgrade their homes with the release of its first offering in the home renovation sector, and how they've started to look at that offering around retrofitting, functionalism, and how you can start to seamlessly integrate Crate and Barrel into a project without necessarily having to spend loads of money on demolition and rebuilding and throwing everything out. And think about what they've called the No Demo Reno
Right.
as a collection of 400 items, I think is a really interesting concept. And I think as we start to rethink and rescale budget in for what most consumers globally is a cost of living crisis, where we're also seeing rampant inflation, just how much money we have to spend on a home reno. It's that simple, is something that more and more of us are having to take into account. So the key phrase for us that you should take away from this is what we've called regenerative modularity.
Hmm.
So how do I actually reuse, upscale, recycle, and rethink rather than just throwing everything away and starting again?
Fascinating. And one other part that I really liked in this section of the report, when you're talking about those wellness spaces and, how do we design everything about 15-minute city and thinking about what our consumers need, both for like emotional well being as well as physical well being. Something you guys talked about was that not only do we need spaces for calm, but we need spaces for the opposite to get our pulse racing as well. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, and I kind of think, the sphere is a great example of that, which is this idea of actually how do we create these highly concentrated areas of intense emotional engagement. Just look at the recent book that Dacha Kellner, the American writer, has come up with, Awe, which looks at how do we actually remember the importance and the significance of what he often calls everyday awe. So how do we create these moments of these peaks of emotional intensity?
Mm,
And of course, this is a critical area for hospitality, because as much as hospitality is about calming us down, it's also about these moments of elevated emotion,
mm,
of creating the wow factor, the wow moment. Everyone wants the suite that when you get shown to, that you walk through, you don't, they open the door, you walk in, and you just go, wow,
mhm,
this space is mine for 24 hours,
mhm.
for a week, for 2 weeks, for however long it
Yeah,
is. It's just that moment where you kind of go, this is what this is what I'm paying for. And oh, wow, I'm amazed. This is great.
yeah.
And so that creating those moments of high emotional intensity is increasingly important for brands to recognize.
It's interesting. I never thought of it that way, as in high emotional intensity, but you're so right. Because when I was working in the hotel industry, I was so privileged to have a handful of those experiences just because of my colleagues and my coworkers and my network. And couple that jump out to me is an incredible general manager, Paolo, at the Gritty Palace in Venice. He gave us this
Oh, Paolo, very
incredible,
well.
oh, fantastic. He gave us this incredible suite when we stayed for 2 nights over my birthday, a handful of years ago, and it was exactly what you just said. We walked in and we were like, "I can't believe this is where we are," and I remember that feeling, I remember that room, everything vividly to this day. And then similarly for our honeymoon, we were really lucky to get to stay at the St. Regis Maldives, another incredible, incredible resort. And one day the butler called us because, they all have butlers there, as part of the St. Regis brand. And he said, "Be ready at 5 o'clock. We have a surprise for you." And they picked us up in the golf cart and they drove us around the island. And we stopped in front of the hotel's yacht. And they said, "We're going to sail you around for a little sunset sail to celebrate your wedding." And it's those moments of that heightened emotion that you said that are
Yeah,
the stories that I still tell and think about to this day.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move into the third trend, gaming. And what you said earlier about how this is generational is really hit home for me. I am not a gamer, so it was very surprised to see this in here. And even more was super surprised what you said earlier about how women are nearly half of gamers now and are poised to actually dominate in terms of demographics in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a fascinating area. But in essence, I think it's very simple. Play and gaming is an integral part of human nature, and it's how we learn, it's how we test,
Hmm,
it's how we challenge, it's how we visualize, it's how we create the both the boundaries that we need as human beings to socialize and to engage. And it's the most fabulous kind of part, I think, of the human mindset.
hmm,
But clearly it's not just a human trait. We see all sorts of animals engage with play and use it as part of a learning and socialization process. Although, obviously, as we know, it is something that tends to fall off as we move into adulthood. And yet, the remnants of play continue with us. And gaming is something that's just picked up on that. And some parts of it is just about how we keep ourselves occupied, how we keep our hands occupied, we maybe keep our brains occupied in a low level way. But it is also, for many, how we really stimulate ourselves, we push ourselves, and we find ourselves being challenged, and we open ourselves up in new and interesting ways. And so the sector is really continuing to grow. It's going to double in size by the end of this decade from where it was back in 2019.
wow.
And as we've both now identified, the future of gaming really is truly set to be female.
Hmm,
And it's the sense that the female gamer is often this unspoken, unknown quotient of the gamer, because we do still tend to think that a gamer is a slightly nerdy, sweaty teen boy sitting in his darkened bedroom on probably a slightly crusty doona. And let's not take that any further, but we all get the picture,
Yeah.
and they're deep into World of Warcraft or Minecraft or, one of these kind of games where it's all just about slaying as many people as possible. And whilst we know that, Fortnite continues to be a major factor, wonderful news story that we just had break on in the UK recently was that a documentary has just been made about a group of actors who went to Grand Theft Auto to create and produce and deliver a production of Hamlet on that network, on that platform, because there is an amphitheater in Grand Theft Auto, and they saw it, they came across it when they were playing continuously during lockdown, because hey, what were actors doing during lockdown?
Right.
And so they said, why don't we use the space? Why don't we play? Why don't we set the play? Which of course is fascinating because Hamlet is about a play within a play.
Mhm.
So you get all these levels of play within play within play. And it's just a perfect example, I think, of how we start to see this continue to really be a focus for people and moving forward,
Mhm.
and how it's continuing to engage. So according to research from the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media, women now make up almost half of gamers globally, including 46% in the US,
Hmm.
47% in Europe, 48% in Australia, 37% in Asia. So a really interesting statistic there, looking at this idea of the importance of women when you look at some of the games that we see people playing, whether it be a Candy Crush or Wordle, or all the others kind of in between. And for us, what we've understood is that self-expression is a key driver of why women game. Research has shown that they spend more money on games consoles, downloadable content, and gaming accessories than men. So it's not just that they're playing the games, they want all the bits that fit around the game, which is hugely important. And again, I think what we see is, again, this diversification of the market. As I've said, it's not all about shoot to kill games. It's about mind games. It's about word games. It's about mapping games. It's about tactility and dexterous games. How do I, like Tetris, how do I make things fit? How do I mentally solve a puzzle? And all of these, I think, are really important into the issues that we see within this notion of gaming. And of course, what we're also beginning to see now is that gaming itself is on what you could call a diversity mission. That having moved from this very male-dominated, very male-perceived space, it's now beginning to look at those issues that we're all tackling around how these spaces offer the perfect opportunity for the intersection of all sorts of diverse people from different backgrounds. So we were fascinated to discover, for example, how you had a whole subset of people that were looking at challenging the racial stereotypes that we found within games, going right down to the fact that within gaming programming for avatars and for the characters that people play, there was really a real shocking lack of good animation around Black and Afro-Caribbean hair. So you had whole groups of programmers that were tackling that very issue,
Right.
to actually ensure that when gamers went into those spaces to create their avatars, they could actually find a hair type that they were comfortable with, that
Right.
actually matched their own racial profile and that said something about who they were.
Right.
And that's got to the stage now where you've had brands pick up on that and want to support that, like Dove. So, Dove, the brand, has actually looked at how it can support that kind of idea, because they see it as being really, really important within their program of activity online, and how they're using spaces like the metaverse in order to encourage people to interact with their brand and to play with their brand. And this ultimately is where I think it becomes important for brands, which is that gaming platforms and environments are allowing consumers to play with brands as much as they want to in the real world.
Right. Right. And that concept of self-expression really coming through is just so interesting to hear about. If we move on to the fourth trend, this is something that really piqued my curiosity when you mentioned it at the top, longevity.
Yeah, so longevity. So just again, recent work by McKinsey and Co. has shown that 82% of US consumers now consider wellness a top or important priority in their
Mhm.
everyday lives. And for me, the focus here is how we have moved away from this idea that we've got fitness, health, diet, wellness, Increasingly we're just packaging them all together, and there's this 360 desire for transformative optimization of our own lives, and that for me is where it gets really interesting. So of course it's impossible to have a conversation around health and wellness without really thinking immediately, of course, about semaglutide.
Mhm.
So let's just jump straight into the Ozempic kind of issue, and how, because this isn't just a fad, and this isn't just the optimization of a drug that may have negative consequences when it's being used for a purpose other than its original purpose. Because clearly what we're seeing is actually the hugely positive side effects or benefits that semaglutide can yield to a whole new kind of cohort or demographic of people. And you've got cardiologists who are saying this is potentially the golden bullet
Hmm.
when it comes to looking at longevity and our ability to optimize weight, to manage stress on the heart, to reduce the opportunity for diabetes, and for some of these life-changing illnesses that are affecting millions of people globally. So, whether it be the work of a writer like Dr. Peter Attia with his blog and his book on longevity, whether it be the work of all of the kind of opportunities that we're seeing within the space to eliminate the gender health gap. So, for example, HerMD, which is obviously a business that you're seeing really gain traction in the US to address the fact that women's health is really not treated seriously as men's health, that we're still only getting to grips, as it were, with understanding the menopause and its impact on half of our populations globally. So all of these issues, I think, are around this idea of how we continue to ensure that we address mind, body, and spirit, that we collectively and cohesively don't just think about the medical thing of what it means when we get ill and then how we deal with that illness, but how do we proactively prevent as much as possible that illness becoming more of a problem as we age.
Yeah.
So how do we ensure that we have the mental acuity to stay well and fit mentally for as long as possible? How do we ensure that we have the mindful health, the emotional health, to ensure that we can enjoy the fact that we've still got our marbles?
Mhm.
And how do we also ensure that our body is fit enough to be able to enable us to enjoy our mental and our emotional good health? And it's this triumvirate of health issues that is really underpinning all of these shifts that we're seeing across industries to really think about the importance of good health, transformative health, and longevity. And it's this simple understanding and the coalescing of all these different industries that were really kind of working independently up until now
Mhm.
to really come together. And of course, hospitality increasingly plays a massively important part in that, because we no longer think of wellness as spa, as a bit of sort of plinky plonky Eastern music, a scented candle, and somebody rubbing oil on our back. We're rewriting the notion of what active wellness means within a hospitality space. We're no longer thinking that fitness is simply about getting onto a bike in the basement of a hotel. We're absolutely rethinking our engagement with wellness and with optimizing health and longevity. So look at Cyro as the new hotel concept that's come out of the One and Only stable. They've just opened one in Dubai. They're about to open another one in Europe, where they're really looking at this highly kind of focused, proactive consumer guest who is really, really focused on both health maintenance, but also optimization and transformation. And I think this is where it becomes really, really important.
We hear so much about Ozempic today, but what I thought was interesting from the report was you looking at the ripple effects of people being on it. You cited Bank of America forecasting that 1/7 the US population could be using a GLP-1 weight loss drug by 2030. So I just thought it was
Yeah,
so interesting too how you're not just looking at the trend of Ozempic, but then you're looking at, well, what will that trend mean next if you do have a
yeah,
seventh of the population on that drug?
yeah. Exactly. I think it's so easy to dismiss Ozempic as this kind of flash in the pan
Mm.
health fad that where we kind of Kardashianize it. Um, and I think there's a real danger with this, that we have to think beyond that blip And sure, for sure, that's part of what's going on right now. But this is way bigger than that.
Fifth and final trend, sustainability, a hot topic, no pun intended, the
Yeah.
poor earth that we have. Tell me about a bit about that, what you're seeing.
Well, I really believe, Katie, that the first thing to remember is that being sustainable goes beyond dealing with climate change or thinking about being environmentally sensitive. Sustainability at its heart is about what am I doing now that is going to ensure my prolonged success in the future. To be sustainable is to ensure that you have a future. So what we're seeing with the notion of sustainability is that this isn't some left field Birkenstock wearing, hemp focused, you know, hippie on a or hipster on a freewheeling bike with a bun, drinking craft beer and obsessing with their sourdough starter. Again, it's bigger than that. This is about looking at yourself as an organization, as a business, saying, am I sustainable? Am I going to be here in 50 years' time?
Mm.
And of course, resource scarcity and climate change are just part of the equation that you therefore have to acknowledge if you're looking at that issue, which is that we know that we have finite resources. So what am I doing about that? How am I going to make them last? How am I going to make them stretch? How am I going to really maybe rethink my business equations or my business vision? Because maybe my business vision isn't about more plus more equals better. Maybe less plus smarter equals better and also more profitable. So, I'm really beginning to look at the opportunity for organizations to realize that actually driving towards a position of earning less revenue might actually make them more profitable in the future.
Mm.
So it's no longer about this more and more and more mindset, which of course is what drove 20th century growth.
Mm.
And that is no longer fit for purpose in the 21st century. So that's an integral part, I think, of looking at this. So in essence, so much of our work in sustainability has been looking at the importance for bold leadership. So we see this from obviously individuals like the CEO and founder of, ex-CEO, the founder of Patagonia.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at business leaders who have made some really clear promises and really thought about their legacy of creating an organization and what that might mean for the future. So that for me is where we start from. And then, yes, of course, we do look at things like climate and we do start to look at its impact on travel. So we recently did a report for Intrepid, the Australian independent travel business, who were really prepared to stick their neck out as a travel agency and say, hey, our future might be about people traveling less. Let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than run away from that and go, oh, that's too risky. Let's not talk about it. It's like, no, let's face it. And as a result, of course, the journalists loved it. And so they wrote about it a lot because it was a risky kind of proposition.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't just kind of trying to hide behind the idea of what they were having to face. And so, we start to talk about the idea that air miles moving forward might not be a reward for your travel profligacy, but air miles might be a prescribed amount of miles that you can travel in a given year. And then after that, that's it. You can't fly anymore. What will that mean to the hospitality industry over the next 10 years if we reach that kind of state? So I think there are all sorts of issues that float around this idea of how we're most definitely seeing, I think, post-COVID, the desire for people to maybe stay longer and to reevaluate their travel requirements and think more carefully about how they travel and why they travel. And so I think we're seeing more of that. We are certainly seeing this push towards expedition and intrepid travel. So wanting to maybe attack that bucket list and go to places that no one's ever been before. But we are also, I think, aware of the fact that some really recent research has shown that 80% of tourists visit only 10% of the world's destinations. So we're all going to the same places over and over again. And I think that's something that we need to challenge and that we need to really think about, which is how do we diversify our travel so that we're not all going to Venice or Paris or Florida. There are some amazing other locations that we need to start visiting so that we just ease the stress, that we ease the problems that we see with this idea of mass tourism. So we clearly start to talk about that within this report, but then it moves into other areas where we see that intensity of burn of product and spend. So in the report, we look at fashion and attempts to make fashion more circular and to rethink our relationship with fashion. But one of the bigger kind of unspoken areas in this that again needs to be addressed is the amount of energy that we use every time we do a Google search, every time we turn to Chat GPT, every time we open a new web browser. And that again is one of the kind of the big elephants, as it were, in the room, which is that we're not really talking about the amount of energy we expend when we use modern technology. So we kind of we look at that too, and
Mm.
we come to some conclusions about where that's going to take us. Or to some extent, not so much conclusions, but offer some challenges to our readers to think about how they need to look at that themselves as individuals, but also as professionals working for an organization or a brand.
Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to give us such incredible insights into this new year ahead. Before you go, though, I would love to ask you the final three questions that I ask everyone
Sure.
on the podcast. So, first, what was the best hospitality experience you've ever had?
Okay, so mine relates to the Aman brand.
Mm,
So I certainly was for a while an absolute Aman junkie because for me, the level of engagement and experience that they were able to deliver to their guests was second to none.
mm,
And probably my favorite ever was going to a Manikas in India, which is their tented property in Rajasthan on the edge of one of the big tiger reserves in India, where you go to shoot tiger, as in with your camera, not with a gun.
right.
And so doing one of those pre-dawn experiences where you're woken up super early, you're bundled into a 4x4 to go into a nature track, and you spend half the day, and then you get to see the animal in the wild. And it's, so you come back euphoric, and coming back to the camp, having had this really early start and maybe just a cup of coffee and a biscuit and sitting in the back of a 4x4, being entranced with the beauty of the surroundings, and having the camp leader, the camp kind of GM say, "Oh, you must be exhausted and hungry. Let's get you some lunch." And then before I knew it, a table appeared on the lawn, a couple of chairs, and a sunshade appeared. And before I knew it, I'd sat down. There was a cold glass of beer in front of me, and there was food on the table.
Mm,
I hadn't even seen a menu.
mm,
Why did I need to see a menu? Their job was to feed me. They knew I was vegetarian. They didn't need to show me a menu. They just made me the most delicious lunch. It was one of the best lunches I've ever had because it was only halfway through that I suddenly realized I didn't see a menu.
right.
They just
You just
brought me
knew.
food.
Yeah.
And it was the most simple act of hospitality, which, if you think about it, is what we do to guests in our home almost every time we come.
Right.
Bar asking for a few dietary requirements, we do not present our guests with a choice.
Right.
If you're coming for Sunday lunch, you're coming for Sunday
Yep.
lunch.
And we know
And
your requirements already.
I know who you are,
Yep.
and I know you don't like lasagna, so I'm not going to make. But I know you love my shepherd's pie.
Yep.
And it's those kind of simple things that we do that matter the most.
And on the opposite side of that, what was the worst hospitality experience you've
Well,
ever
that's
had?
also from Amman. So I went to stay at the Amman in Venice for, again, like you, for an important
Mhm.
occasion. And I thought and I've never had a favor from Amman. It's not a brand in which I get special treatment or whatever. Yes, I get upgrades, but I don't get them through a network or through contacts. And I got shown to the room and I just went, nah, this is just not going to do. I'm here in Venice. There's no view. This room looks like I could be staying in an intercontinental. There is absolutely nothing special. And that was deeply disappointing. But the flip side is that the conversation I then had with the GM about how to resolve it was fantastic
Okay.
because not only did he get me to pay double what I was paying, I did come away with a triple upgrade and so had a Tiepolo on my ceiling, a view of the Grand Canal, and felt like I was being treated like $1 million,
Right.
even though I was paying twice as much as I was for the room that I originally booked.
Right. The epitome of a win-win. They get more money and you
Yeah,
get the best of the best of the best.
exactly.
And last question for you. What does hospitality mean to you? And is there anyone, it could be a person, a brand, anyone at all that you think has truly mastered it?
Oh, that's such a good question. And Yes, I do actually. I have become a massive fan of a restaurant that recently opened in London called the Arlington. Now, Arlington is the rebirth of a very famous London restaurant called Le Caprice. And this was one of the early restaurants behind that was created by two of London's greatest restaurateurs, Chris Corbin and Jeremy King,
Mhm.
who went on to create the Wolseley, to reignite the Ivy, Scott's in Mayfair. Their list is just endless. Jeremy now operates on his own, and since he reopened Arlington this year, I have just been amazed at the quality of experience there, because there are waiters there that first served me 20 years ago who have come up to me and said, "Chris, it's so lovely to see you here." And nothing beats that level of loyalty that that staff have to that one particular restaurateur to continue to work with him,
Mhm.
but also that knowledge and that sense of loyalty to customers to have taken the effort, even if they just recognize my face, to then go and check with the team who is that person, because I know him.
Mhm.
So yeah, blown away.
Wow. Well, Chris, honestly, can't thank you enough for being here to start 2025 off right for us. For people who want to learn more or work with the Future Lab, how can they get in touch?
Really simple, www.thefuturelaboratory.com. So just come and visit it on our website, have a look, loads of stuff for you to engage, some great reports that you can download with our compliments, and others like the FutureFive that you will need to pay for, but it's going to be the best investment you make this side of Easter.
Fantastic. Thank you again.
Take care, Katie.
All right, everyone, it's time for today's sweet summary where I break down the key insights and actionable takeaways from today's conversation. What a way to start off the new year. Am I right? Personally, I love nothing more than New Year trends, predictions, resolutions, and goal setting. Nothing like a proverbial blank sheet of paper to make you feel energized. I know. Spoken like a true type A, list making eldest daughter over here, but it's true. And that's why I thought it was so special to have Chris here with us to share these insights as we each plan for the year ahead. So let's recap the top 5 trends for 2025, according to the Future Laboratory. And yes, my fellow Americans, I know we pronounce it laboratory, but I'm just going to mirror Chris on this one. Like many things, it just sounds better in British English. So, trend number 1, artificial intelligence. I was so grateful for him removing a lot of the fear around AI, demystifying what it actually means, and not just hitting us with the typical buzzwords and jargon that tend to surround the phrase. What sticks out the most to me is him saying technology does not transform society. Society transforms itself using technology. So, in the next 12 months, how can we empower ourselves and our businesses using this modern day calculator, as Chris called it? And how can we utilize AI to do the most onerous tasks for us so we get to spend more time on the creative pursuits that actually require human intelligence? Trend number 2, future spaces. I was surprised to learn what an urban society we are, and even more, how much we will continue to be one in the future. Maybe this is showing my age, but sometimes all I want, or at least all I think I want, is to live someplace quiet, peaceful, and serene. But Chris shared a mind blowing stat that 70% of all people will live in an urban area by 2050. And with all the focus on creating future spaces, maybe I'm not wrong about the desire for peace. He talked about needing to not only offer spaces that instill calm, but equally to create spaces that get our pulse racing. He talked about the need in hospitality, particularly to create everyday awe, peaks of emotional intensity that get customers talking and provide the most memorable experiences for them. The third trend surprised me the most, gaming. I was fascinated to hear that the industry will finish the decade double the size that it was in 2019. Even more shocking to learn was that female gamers now make up almost half of all gamers globally, and that they're poised to become gaming's dominant demographic. Gaming clearly means big business, but if your product or business is not in the space, does that mean you can't capitalize on it? Some examples Chris shared showed me that that's not the case at all. he briefly touched on Dove, and I want to share more about that here. While it's fantastic to see more gender equality in gaming, the report highlights that an overwhelming majority of Black gamers, 85%, believe that video games poorly represent textured hair. So, as Chris touched on, Unilever's Dove brand took that information and teamed up with the open source Afro Hair Library to create a free guide for coding natural hair. When I think about gaming, Dove is certainly not the first brand that comes to mind, yet I love the creativity of this partnership, inserting themselves into the gaming conversation in a way that feels super authentic to their brand. The fourth trend was all about longevity. And this one personally hits home for me due to some losses and terminal illnesses in my family. This trend isn't just about living longer, it's about maintaining and even improving our quality of life as we do so, ensuring we have quality of life while increasing the quantity of years we might also have. We talked about the rise of Ozempic and other GLP-1 drugs. Morgan Stanley estimates that users of these medications might reduce their calorie intake by up to 30%. And a study by Bernstein saw users shifting more towards protein rich, low carb, and homemade foods. So, if we think a few steps ahead, how will this impact grocery stores, fast moving consumer goods, and consumer packaged goods? What about the implications on airlines, fashion labels, even room service and hotel restaurants? This trend is a great reminder to zoom out. It's not just about what is happening now, but how that will cause a ripple effect across multiple consumer categories in the future. The fifth and final trend was sustainability, and it was refreshing to hear a new definition of the term. What am I doing now that is going to ensure my prolonged success in the future? He removed the caricature of sustainability only being for Birkenstock wearing, hemp obsessed, craft beer drinking hipsters. He very clearly said it's bigger than that. And he's challenging the hyperdrive more that companies have been focused on to date, encouraging organizations to ask themselves, are we still going to be here in 50 years? As he so eloquently put it, maybe more plus more doesn't equal better. Maybe less plus smarter equals more profitable. So, once again, Happy New Year, everyone. May it be your healthiest, wealthiest, and happiest one yet.